Hatfield Aerodrome, England. November rain needling the tarmac. Floodlights paint a pale tunnel through the mist. A small crowd huddles in coats, collars up. Mechanics hold their breath. Two Merlin engines cough, catch, and roll into a velvet thunder that vibrates through rib and bone. A civil servant with an immaculate tie laughs under his umbrella. A wooden airplane, unarmed? It will be sawdust by tea time. The aircraft, a thin-waisted ghost with a wasp's stinger of a tail, drifts from the hangar lights into darkness. Wheels skipping puddles. Wings just a shade of gray against the night. The cockpit lamp glows once, then goes dark. Somewhere across the channel a radar dish turns. A phosphor line sweeps a green circle and waits for metal to answer. It expects weight. It expects echoes. The wooden airplane does not answer. What they don't know yet is that on this night they are witnessing the beginning of their own end. The monster did not begin as a monster. It began as a nuisance, a sketch on a drafting board and a fight in a committee room. De Havilland, a company famous for elegant civil aircraft, pitched a heresy, a fast, unarmed, twin-engine fighting bomber built largely of wood, spruce and birch plywood, glued into a smooth monocoque shell. No gun turrets, no armor. Speed, not bulk. Precision, not brute force. The Air Ministry wanted the opposite. More guns, more crew, more metal. When war began, aluminum was a ticket to priority. Wood smelled of scarcity and compromise. Gun turrets won arguments because they were heavy and visible. Wood lost because it sounded like furniture. The earliest papers read like dismissal slips. Unorthodox. Imprudent. Inadequate defensive provision. Workshop chiefs grumbled that a wooden airframe would swell in damp, split in heat, and delaminate under stress. Test officers pointed to enemy fighters and asked how a bomber without guns would survive the channel. Geoffrey de Havilland and his chief designer, Ronald Bishop, answered with mathematics and a very British sort of impudence. They proposed a sandwich, two thin birch veneers around a balsa core, formed over concrete molds, no rivets to drag, no panel joints to sing. The structure would be lighter than metal, smoother than a polished sheet, and stiff as a drum. It would let the Merlins lift the airframe on speed alone, not on firepower. Fewer crew meant less weight and less drag. Less drag meant less time inside the enemy's gun solution. The workshop smells changed. Not of oil and solvent only, but of cassin, resorcinol, spruce, and steam. Cabinet makers and piano craftsmen joined the war. Bar clamps bloomed across great curved molds like iron flowers. Thin wooden skins came off the concrete as if the building itself were laying eggs. They called the prototype the DH-98. Test. Pilots called it that mad wooden thing. The DAT. Ministry called it canceled. More than once, orders stopped, restarted, stopped again. The company pushed through with private money, a gambler's grin hidden behind polite memos. Early trials were ragged. Cooling problems, aileron buzz at speed, tailplane flutter that got into the bones. The structure, smooth as glass, fooled the wind in some places and infuriated it in others. Engineers cut, patched, sanded, and tried again. The airplane shrugged off bullets on paper but collected them in rumor. Critics insisted again that the enemy would fill its empty sky with lead. And then, in a clear winter climb, the prototype went past 360 miles per hour and kept rising. The stopwatch said so. So did the shock on faces around the airfield. It climbed like a fighter and flew like a knife. No one imagined that this apparent folly carried the germ of victory. War does not accept paper promises. It requires the kind of proof that leaves holes. The Mosquito, as the public would learn to call it, first flew quick reconnaissance dashes where nobody wanted to send a crew. Long-legged, Alone, too high and too fast for the routine intercept. Photographs came back sharp. The airplane's wooden skin bobbed inside radar static like a fish hiding under ripples, especially at low altitude where ground clutter sang loudly. Pilots returned with eyes that had seen too much sea and too little sky. They said it was a good ship, but the skeptics demanded numbers. Then came the first public stumble. A Mosquito, loaded heavy for a precision demonstration raid, met weather and flak and the arithmetic of chance. A cracking sound in a wing skin. A forced landing that became a bonfire on a field with cameras. The wooden wonder burns like a church, somebody sneered. And the headline wrote itself. Reports took the professional tone of regret masking scorn. Delamination suspected under concentrated thermal stress, insufficient defensive armament for sustained exposure to enemy, fighters. Recommendation, consider turreted variant. The ministry's old appetite returned. Add guns, add crew, add turrets. The de Havilland team argued that every pound of gun was a pound you must kill with fuel and distance. They won fewer meetings than they lost. A turreted prototype took shape like a concession at a dinner table. Pilots gritted their teeth. They liked the airplane as it was, fast, clean, a thoroughbred. They watched bureaucrats bolt harness to a greyhound and call it safety. For a moment the enemy looked correct, and the wooden idea looked naive. The turn began with a negative, not an explosion, not a kill count. A blank radar cruise in France, then in the Low Countries, logged odd failures to acquire. Brief, invisible intruders under the lobe of the dish. At treetop height near the sea at dusk, a target would vanish into ground return. By the time an operator coaxed a blip back, the airplane was gone, voice fading in the headphones, already a rumor behind a river. Engineers at de Havilland saw the other side of that negative in the wind tunnel. Birch and spruce did not behave like metal under an electromagnetic eye. The smooth wooden skin reflected weakly, and when a Mosquito piloted by a certain kind of artist slid along the deck, its metalness dissolved into the chorus of hedges, sheds, and water. Not stealth. Something older. Low signature by accident and by intention. The turn gained teeth with operations. In 1942, a brace of Mosquitoes skimmed the sea and struck Gestapo archives in Oslo, a surgical punch designed more to erase records than to shatter walls. Smoke rose from paperwork and pride. Later that year, another small formation knifed into Berlin in daylight. Sirens wailing for an enemy whose name the defenders couldn't agree on because the radar plotters, angry and nauseated, had nothing clean to point at. The Luftwaffe raised fighters that chased contrails and found none. A film director would later claim the raid was only symbolic. The symbolism, in fact, was the weapon. The air was no longer entirely theirs at any hour. Then came the systematic exploitation of what wood and speed had suggested. Electronic warfare units flew Mosquitoes loaded not with bombs but with jammers, Mandrel to blind early warning radar, Piper rack to burble in the ear of ground controllers. Pathfinders used precise navigation aids, Oboe, to draw chalk lines of light across black cities, and Mosquitoes rode those chalk lines like blades. For night fighters, the type became an executioner. A fast shadow with 420mm cannon that arrived unannounced behind the tailplane of a bomber hunter and pulled the trigger before the scope could twitch. Pilots learned a grammar. Very fast on the way in. Very low where radar is deaf. Pop to height only for the throw. Then back to the noise of hedgerows and water. If you meet a fight you cannot win, simply refuse it. Go faster. The wooden airplane was not invulnerable. It bled like any machine made by men. But the balance of probabilities bent in its favor. And probability is the god of war. A symbol emerged quietly, curves of pale wood glued into a single intention. 2 merlins hauling, no turret silhouettes against the sky. The thing looked fragile and flew invincible. The enemy's laughter died in dispatches first. Radar stations reported fleeting, low-level intruders that presented poor returns. Controllers requested more patrols and got only more frustration. Night fighter crews, exhausted and polite, wrote short diary entries, saw nothing, then death in the gun sight. Ground defenses learned to hate the sound that arrived after the fact. The clipped thunder of merlins already receding. A report with no preface. Sentences should be short here. That is the rhythm memory keeps. 4 across a river at dawn. A bridge explodes like a snapped violin string. 2 at noon, buzzing a rail yard, pinpointing fuel wagons. The smoke is black and thick. A pair at dusk, Gestapo headquarters in one city, then another. The facade peels like bark. At night, a Mosquito night fighter hunts by quiet mathematics and is not hunted in return. Convoys sleep easier because a radar in the dark is talking to itself. Numbers because otherwise this sounds like rumor. Cruise at 250, 300 knots low level. Dash over 350. Service ceiling high enough to ignore most flak when needed. 420mm cannon and 4 303 machine guns packed into the nose on fighter variants. No turret drag, all business. Bomb load for precision raids sufficient to erase a target that mattered more as a nerve than as a building. Loss rates compared to peers remarkably low for the tasks assigned. Psychology, because war is a mind first and a map later. If an enemy can strike your nerve centers by day in small, undetectable numbers, your defenses must answer with noise, and noise wastes fuel, pilots, and sleep. If your radar sings confidently, except when it matters, your doctrine begins to mumble. Civilian breath returned by inches. The Mosquito was not a blanket bomber. It was a scalpel that made room for blankets later. The roar of 8 heavy guns from a different squadron meant siege. The whisper scream of a wooden twin meant a lock broken and a door opened. The cadence of operations hardened. Briefing. Map pins. Keep it low. Engines. The strip is wet. Hedges flick beneath the canopy like piano keys. A lighthouse passes at shoulder height. A dish turns inland, blind for a heartbeat that matters. Release. Throttle. Home. And from the other side of the channel, the cadence sounds like this. Sirens. Pause. A noise you can't plot. Broken glass. A hole where a name used to be. Nothing else. A quick breath here. The doctrine is about to right itself. The new manual is simple and infuriating to men who like big answers. Speed instead of armor. Smooth instead of bristling. Wood where you can, metal where you must. Measure your drag and then cut it again. Attack ideas, not just buildings. Trust navigation and timing the way older men trusted turrets. Let radar stare and see nothing of value until it's too late. This is not romance. It is engineering that respects environment. Heavy bombers with turrets were answers to one sky. The Mosquito taught another sky. An altitude where ground return poisons a plot. A speed where intercept windows collapse. A form so clean that a radar has less to love. The myth-busting is quick. And it should stay quick. Myth. Wood is weak. Truth. A good sandwich is a miracle. Birch, balsa birch, glued with resorcinol, formed in concrete molds, cured into a skin that spreads load across curves like a shell. Metal is wonderful. Wood is wonderful if you understand what it wants. Myth. A bomber must defend itself with guns. Truth. A bomber can defend itself by never being where the defense expects a bomber to be. Myth. Radar makes surprise obsolete. Truth. Radar makes a different kind of surprise necessary. Adapt to the blind spots and the processing limits of the system, not to the pride of the men operating it. Allies tell the story in dry minutes that smell of tea. Pathfinders arriving first. Chaff, window, thrown from mosquitoes to confuse scopes. Mandrel jamming, smearing early warning nets. Oboe beams traced with compass-true patience. Follow-on waves born under this protection from heavies that carry cities in their bellies. Enemy voices, recorded later, are tighter. A controller in a bunker snaps at a pilot. Target is below clutter. Climb and orbit. A night fighter ace, honest and tired, shrugs. We killed many, but when a mosquito wanted, it took us instead. The effect beyond the front is philosophical. Nations learn, again, that ingenuity is a better wartime investment than bulk. Industrial power matters, but so does the freedom to break a rule that was never written for you. And for engineers in workshops from Canada to Australia, the mosquito becomes a proof of citizenship. Your hands, previously useful for chairs and violins, now build an aircraft that answers radar with smooth silence. The doctrine writes a last line. When everyone else is shouting, whisper so close they mistake you for air. Return to the rain. Return to the laugh under an umbrella. Return to the sawdust joke. After victory, the wooden aircraft does not demand a parade. It retires to museums and stories told badly on television. The metal age takes credit because it is shiny and lasts longer outdoors. Historians argue about firsts and fathers. The mosquito waits in hangars that smell of wax and dust, wood holding its curve the way a violin holds a note. But the radar equation remembers. Operators who grew old remember the nights when the scope stayed clean and the ground shook anyway. Pilots remember the hedges at wingtip height and the cities that breathed again because a wooden thing made a hole in a lock. The echo of the opening in reverse. They laughed when they saw a fighter with the soul of furniture. They stopped laughing when their radar saw nothing and the target was already gone. Listen for the last line, the one the aircraft never says out loud, but etches into maps. The thunder spoke not with batteries or massed guns, but with 2 merlins and a skin of glued trees, and the sky of certainty never quite belonged to them again.